Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Superhero Ethics Podcast. I'm Matthew S. Fox. I'm one of your hosts.
I'm Paul Christopher Hoppy, your other crankier host.
I'd say that's pretty accurate. Today we're going to be talking about villains. A couple of months ago, we did a podcast on the topic of villains who might have a point, looking at villains who we could sometimes agree with. And we looked at that time at Astra from Supergirl. This time we're going to be looking at the character of Magneto from X-Men. And I should say from the beginning that, as we often do, we're going to be focusing mostly on the visual movies and TV shows. And we'll probably be spoiling, I would imagine, every X-Men movie that's been shown, including up to and including the most recent Logan, which is a great movie. But I wanted to give kind of a spoiler warning. All of those things are fair game. So
watch all of the X-Men movies first,
yes.
Except some of them are really bad. So don't watch like X3, maybe X-Men United.
You know, some of those interior Wolverine movies, not the best.
Not the best.
Kind of odd because I think Logan is pretty much the best X-Men movie ever made. But
yeah, the third one of every trilogy is the worst, except for the Wolverine trilogy, when the third one's the best.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But let's start out pretty simple. So, Paul, to you, is Magneto a villain?
Well, I guess my answer would be, is an anti-hero a hero?
Yeah.
And if the answer to that is yes, right, which I'd say most people, yeah, an anti-hero is a hero,
right.
Mostly, kind of, sort of. Then I'd say Magneto is a villain because he's an anti-villain.
Okay, you kind of lost me there.
Okay. All right. So a hero is a pretty straightforward idea, right? An anti-hero is basically a hero who sometimes uses villainous means or does things that, you know, maybe we think are wrong or a lot of people think are wrong, generally in order to achieve a heroic goal.
Yep. Which
Magneto sort of does, except anti-heroes in general tend to be protagonists, right? Like a Dirty Harry or maybe a Dexter or, I mean, any number of characters. Basically, most of the heroes in today's fiction
yeah.
are basically anti-heroes. Right?
The characters in Breaking Bad, exactly, yeah.
Right. Although Walter White, I'd argue, is, like, you could call him a protagonist villain.
Right.
You know, or maybe you could call him an anti-villain. And so when it comes to, you know, I mean, your standard villain is just a villain, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they're the bad guy that the good guys go after and, you know, beat usually, but not always. But an anti-villain, I mean, to me, which, you know, it's kind of a sort of subjective, wishy-washy term that mostly I read up about on TV tropes, which is just a rabbit hole of a website that you can just click from link to link. But it rings true on a lot of things. But so an anti-villain to me is a villain who's a villain. I mean, they're just going around doing villainy stuff, right?
Right.
But they're certainly the hero of their own story.
Yeah.
Just we're not really watching their story. We're watching someone else's story, so they're the villain. But if you take things from their perspective, I mean, sometimes they're doing things that are villainous in order to achieve what they consider a good goal, and we might agree with them. And so you could say in that regard they're an anti-hero. But they definitely fill the role of villain in whatever we're looking at. So I guess X-Men First Class, to get into spoilers on that one, that's kind of that's the beginning of Magneto's story in the X-Men film franchise.
Right. And this is to for those folks who are just reminding you, it's not the first of the recent X-Men movies, but it's the one that tries to go back to the original days of the X-Men when Charles Xavier and Magneto are together, putting together, you know, at first starting to work together, and that movie is about how they eventually part ways and decide to take two different perspectives to, you know, what to do about the mutant human situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's sort of about, I mean, it is about the founding of the X-Men, and it's very much about how Xavier becomes Xavier, but it's also very much about how Magneto becomes Magneto, or how Eric becomes Magneto.
I couldn't remember his name.
Yeah. And I felt like throughout that movie he had a pretty consistent characterization, and I think that's the movie that I've liked him the best in. Mm-hmm. You know, that's the earliest movie chronologically, right? And
Right.
it's the beginning of kind of the second trilogy if you throw out the Wolverine movies, which I guess that first one happened first, but whatever. But and then from there they went and did X-Men, Days of Future Past,
Right.
where future Magneto and future Xavier are like getting on really well because everything's the world's just gone to hell, and they've sent, what they sent Wolverine, but I don't know. So some of
Let's not get too lost in the details here.
Right, but the point is that Magneto there really kind of works with Xavier, but then he's like, now I'm a villain, and
Mm-hmm.
and I felt like that lost some of the kind of the subtlety of the character and the fact that like I'm just gonna go to this question, then we'll get into that train of thought later. But
Sure.
basically that. Yeah, in that movie, he's a villain because the writers just decided he has to be their villain.
Yeah,
And then in the next movie, also, they decided he has to be a villain, so they make him that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point to start with, is that we're, on the one hand, we're sort of talking about this character as though they were a real person, in terms of like, well, okay, so, is Magneto good or bad, the way we might about some political figure today. But of course, Magneto is a fictional character being written by numerous different people in numerous different venues over the years. And I think it's easy to kind of get lost in the weeds of, well, what is a real Magneto and what isn't.
Right.
I would certainly agree with you. I think one of the I love the Magneto character as well. I think one of the problems that can happen sometimes is exactly what you're talking about, where the writers stop saying, what would Magneto do in this situation, and start saying, what would our bad guy do?
Right.
Because totally. I think where you started from, I completely agree. To me, what makes Magneto to me is a character who reminds me an awful lot of Kingpin from the Daredevil TV show. And that, like you were saying, both of them are completely convinced that they are the protagonist of their own story.
Yeah.
And because that they're convinced that they are using their powers to help people who desperately need to be helped. So let's talk a little bit more about Magneto specifically. And I think you're right. First Class is a great way to start. And we'll get in a bit, because I think we can separate a little bit in terms of like his methods from his goals. And that's another separation. But let's just start with, in terms of where he's coming from in X-Men First Class, and that idea that he has in a lot of his movies. Where do you agree with him? Where do you think that he has some legitimate points?
I mean, his main overriding goal is just like righteous. I mean, his main overriding goal is to prevent the genocide of the mutants, basically. Because he knows, I mean, he grew up in World War II, I think Poland, although it's kind of not always clear. And there's a great, one of the few graphic novels that I've read with Magneto is, it's like a origin story for him when he's a kid, and that whole, trying to escape the Holocaust, and it's pretty awesome. And horrible, of course. But so, he's seen that. He's seen one group of people turn on another group of people and try to destroy them outright. And, those are just humans being horrible to other humans.
Yeah.
And the, mutants are really, they're a subspecies because they can, mutants and humans, non-mutants, I guess. They're all humans, right?
Right.
But can have kids, so they're not technically different species, but there's, there is actually a much more and a very legitimate fear of mutants among non-mutants and even among other mutants. I mean, there are mutants who could destroy the world, right? Like really easily. The same way that we have a very rational fear of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, we've talked on some other episodes about how, people having some of these powers, especially like mind control or things like that, are, pose very significant dangers and very significant threats to people. And I think you're right that there's some legitimacy to those fears, but I think, to me, one of the things that I like so much about some of these portrayals, especially First Class, is the way, particularly in Magneto, there's a real sort of like, hey, wait a minute, no matter how afraid you are of mutants, how much are you letting that fear justify treating people in really inhumane, terrible ways?
Right. I mean, it's rational to be afraid of well, okay, I don't actually think it's that rational, but to be afraid of terrorism or to be afraid of mass shootings or whatever. There's while statistically you're very unlikely to actually be in any incident, it is reasonable to be afraid of getting murdered because people get murdered, right? So, but it's unreasonable to let that fear lead you to think, well, maybe let's oppress these huge swaths of humanity just because, like, then I'll feel a little safer, right? Like, that's not reasonable. And so, while the fear of mutants, and not like, oh, there's a mutant, I'm afraid, but a broader fear, I think, of, well, some mutant somewhere could use their power in a way that would, destroy the world or kill tons of people. The same way Kim Jong-un could use his power, to murder hundreds of thousands or millions of people. And I mean, he does, but mostly through starvation and his own people or whatever. But, but that's the thing, is that there are real people who also can cause mass devastation in our world. And it's reasonable to have fear of those people and what they might do, but that doesn't mean that then it's like, oh, well, Kim Jong-un is Korean, so all Korea, it's like, what, Well,
and I think one thing that becomes really important here is, and I think this is something that Eric Magneto highlights so well, is that there is some degree of these particular powers can be very scary, but that an awful lot of, I think this is very insightful because I think this is true in our world as well, an awful lot of fear is based in difference.
Yes.
We get used to things that are normal and that are the same. And this is going to sound like a crazy connection, but I think it's very relevant. Like, I read a paper when I was in grad school that talked about how, one of the things that was happening in America was the explosion of chain restaurants. And one of the reasons for that was they did a lot of studies, and they said that people were afraid to go, not someone's going to attack me, but ordering something new and different was a nervous, scary experience.
Right.
And that especially as that part of it is that people are, it used to be if you lived in the same town all of your life, Joe's Diner, what's on the menu there because you've lived there all your life. Mm-hmm. But now that as people are moving to so many different places in the course of their lives, you don't have time to find, so you want an Applebee's or a Denny's or an Olive Garden or whatever, because it's, and all of this is to say that I think that there's something very scary but very, very human about the desire for sameness and the fear of things that are different. And I think that's, as much as we can say, there some of the mutations are dangerous or allow people to do dangerous things. A lot of this is just about people being afraid of things being different.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, another rational reaction to let's say someone, like Bobby or whatever can make ice, and it's yeah, you could be like, wow, that's scary, but you could also be like, dude, that's awesome. Yeah.
I mean, again, thinking about just what happens with the movies, one of the, I think, always the conceits of the X-Men stories, but that isn't quite accurate to what I think this would be, is if there were mutations like this, I imagine only a small number of those mutations would actually be things that would be theoretically helpful in combat. Right. A lot of them would be things that are oh, well, this is interesting, but it doesn't make you at all a fighter in any way. Right.
It's well, my skill is to turn trees into tables. I don't know. I mean,
I mean, which is great, but it's not probably going to come up in the movie very well.
Right. I'm going to give Logan our past and future guest who did graphic.
Our friend Logan, not the movie. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, our friend Logan. Yes. Give him a shout out here where he, in his photographic novel Harlequin Song, he had a character who made clothes or something. That was the power, it could make clothes, and that's not really a combat skill, and somebody else who could basically fix technology or do stuff with technology, and that can be applied in a combat purpose, but it's just kind of a superpower that's actually pretty useful, Whereas the character he had me playing was he can fight, which was fun because I got to swing on subway things and whatever. But nice. If people have random powers, I mean, if you look at all the random powers people could have, it's a lot of them aren't going to be applicable to hurting other people, right? That's
Right.
not going to be. They're not going to have a direct military application.
No, totally. So let's go a little deeper though with Magneto, because I think you're right. I think when the story is about him saying like, look, we as mutants have a right to be sort of protected. I am 100% with him. And there are a number of times actually where I think he's more right than Professor X in some ways, and I want to get more into that in a second. But it does seem like there are some times, and I don't know how true this always is to the character, but it certainly comes up sometimes, where he's not saying, I want to protect us as mutants. And that mutants are like just as good as humans and shouldn't be attacked. He's going into, we as mutants are more highly evolved than humans, we are better than humans, and we should actually kind of take over.
Right. Well, so there's two. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say, it seems like the stories are never quite clear on, is that what he actually believes, or is it that he thinks that mutants are only going to be safe if they take over? But either way, I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff to unpack there, and I kind of want to hear what's your thoughts when he sort of starts to go in those directions?
Right. So there's a few things. One, I think his prime directive basically is always the survival of mutants and the safety of mutants. And
Right.
sometimes it's like mutant kind, and sometimes it's mutants individually and as people,
Right.
And those are two kind of different things. When he goes from we need to protect mutants to we need to protect mutants by destroying all the humans because that's the only way mutants will be safe, that's where I think he goes from being right to being wrong.
Right.
Like, I don't think destroying all the humans is the answer, and I think Professor X has the right idea in terms of like, well, there's some middle ground between just like, oh, if they're going to kill us, I guess they'll kill us. Mm-hmm. And like, well, let's kill them all first. But I think sometimes Professor X is maybe a little too naive or trusting or whatever in terms of like, well, they'll do the right thing. And, sometimes, you do have to go to war for your survival. But I don't think you then have to, destroy all of the other people and salt the earth, basically. And that definitely sometimes seems like Magneto's where he ends up. Sometimes in a way that's convincing, and sometimes in I guess arbitrarily, just the writers decide that's what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
But then there's also there's the superiority thing that you're saying, which it's interesting because it's like that's kind of what Hitler was saying,
Mm-hmm.
like, and obviously there's no merit to that argument in the case of the Nazis, but like.
There kind of is with mutants.
Exactly. Like, they are literally, like, they're superhumans, like, literally. And while some of their mutations might be negatives,
Mm-hmm.
right, some of them are, like, huge positives. And, like, it's hard. It comes down to, like, well, should the powerful rule, or, and, like, I don't think that they should, but
Mm-hmm.
I do think that it is reasonable for they certainly shouldn't be subjugated. That doesn't make sense.
No, and I think this is where, like, people often talk about how the whole X-Men, that the mutants is a powerful metaphor for, cultural difference, and that the primary one, and I know that this is often quoted, and some people have now said that it's maybe not quite as accurate, but I think there's still a lot of legitimacy to this, is that to some extent the whole thing was meant to be, on some level, a stand-in for the debates about race that were happening in the 50s and 60s, with
Right.
Professor X being Martin Luther King and Magneto being Malcolm X.
Mm-hmm.
And we can go a lot further into that, though I think, as I said, that it's not a perfect metaphor by any means. But one way I think in which that is an important difference with what Magneto is talking about versus any of the sort of cultural differences that this can be a metaphor for, is that, differences like, race, gender, religion, these things are socially constructed. And the differences that we have about them are socially, are social creations. As you said, the fact that one person can suck the metal out of a structure and some person can't, That's not a social construction.
No, it's not.
And so I think, we can acknowledge that that's a place where the metaphor breaks down a little bit.
Yeah.
But even so, I really like the point, and I hadn't thought of this before, but I think you're right, and I hope that this was at least somewhat intentional. I think there's a very good point to the idea that, Magneto is someone who is very much shaped by his experience of the Holocaust, by the horrors he saw there, and the way he saw his people, Jews in Eastern Europe, being treated so horribly. And while he doesn't always go this far, there are times when he himself can sink into that same kind of idea of, my people are the best and therefore should rule and should subjugate everyone else. And I think that there's a really powerful story there about, the abused person growing up to be an abuser.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to finish talking so I could say those words. Okay. But I'm glad you just completed the thought yourself. But
there you go.
Yeah, so clearly I agree with you. I mean, it is very much like that's sort of the template that he was presented with, right. And he doesn't always go to those lengths, but he definitely does. Sometimes the character is like, well, all right, well, if you're saying it's us or you, then, it's going to be us who survive, And I guess to the question of, is that, really a legitimate fear of mutants being wiped out by humans? There's a lot of the movies, including the most recent one, where it's like, yeah, that's what some of the humans want to do. That's not what all the humans want to do. And it's not like it's only the people in power, people with military power or whatever, who want to do that. But it's enough people, and it's enough people who are able to seize power and manipulate the fears of less powerful people. To direct their ire at mutants. And you know what? Sometimes in some storylines, they kill all the mutants. Mm-hmm. In some storylines, they build Sentinels, and then the Sentinels kill them and the mutants. So,
right. Well, I think
sort of well, I guess the joke's on you and us. But
I mean, in some ways, I think it goes back to the same point we were talking about before, that every side in the X-Men in the conflicts around the X-Men movies are on some level being motivated by fear. That it's the people's fear of the mutants and the mutants' fear of other people's fear of them, and I mean, it just becomes so cyclical. And on all sides, I think you can say that those fears are just when you were talking before about fears being rational or reasonable. I often think that in some ways that's almost the wrong question. It's more like on some level I don't think any fear is ever really rational. Well, okay, that's not the wrong. I guess. I mean,
if I fall out of an airplane, I'm very rationally afraid of landing.
Okay.
But yeah, I think where you're going is whether a fear is understandable or not.
Right. I mean, there are situations where if a person has had a particularly terrible experience, mm-hmm. and now finds it difficult to be in situations that remind them of that. I can use all the logic in the world to show them that the chance of that thing happening again are incredibly small. Mm-hmm. And I can't say that their fear is rational in that kind of in that way, but I couldn't for a moment tell them that I think they're wrong or bad for being afraid in that situation. I think that is the absolutely it's the understandable emotional response. And I think that's what the X-Men stories wound up being about, is about what are we afraid of and why, and then how are we responding to those fears?
Right, and then courage that's not the absence of fear. It's not being afraid of any of those things. It's you have fears, and then you don't let the fear just dictate everything you do. You think about the fears and you confront them. Sometimes you confront them, sometimes you avoid them, but what you don't do, there's an eagle flying right outside my window. This is very weird. I feel like that has to be Gandalf or something. No. All right, wrong. Anyway.
Wrong movie.
But it's very strange.
Stay on target.
I'm from the city, okay? But what were we talking about? Oh, yeah,
fear.
The courage. Let's say I were afraid of eagles, right? Now...
We were talking about my very reasonable fear that we'd go off on a tangent.
Yes, but the point is that you don't let that fear dictate everything. You understand it, and you try to not let it lead you to unreasonable actions, you know,
Right.
where, yeah, the fear can be reasonable. It can be understandable, but, you know, and it's the sort of thing where it's like, yeah, you try, like, you don't always succeed, but the times like you really do need to succeed are the times when you failing is gonna just, you know,
Right.
screw everybody else,
Well,
basically.
And I want to get more into that because I think that's the goals versus methods question. But I want to, for 1 second though, say one more thing about this idea of like Magneto's view of mutants, because I think I absolutely think some of the times where I should have, you know, raised an eyebrow and say I can't really go with him here is when he's talking about, you know, mutants as better. But
Right.
but I think one of the times where I most love what he's saying and the difference between these two things I'm about to talk about, I think is one that is a great mirror for stuff that happens in our real world, is where he's not saying mutants are better, but he's saying mutants are beautiful. Mutants are wonderful in and of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think, here, I say that intentionally because I think, you know, to draw the political connection that I think is pretty intentionally made there, you know, because it's so easy for people to hear one message and think we're saying something else. You know, to say that Black Lives Matter means that white lives don't matter. It doesn't necessarily. You know, that like and here where Magneto was the parallel to Malcolm X. You know, because so much of Malcolm X's message was black is beautiful and black is wonderful, and that was taken as an assault on whiteness, and it was never meant that way.
Right.
And I think to me some of my favorite scenes, and I think this is particularly in First Class, but comes up in some of the other movies as well, is when Magneto is dealing with someone, often it's Mystique, but can also be someone else, who doesn't want to be a mutant, and who wants to change themselves, and wants to do that, the kind of equivalent of passing, basically.
Yeah.
And Magneto is really saying, like, no, what you are is not any worse. You know, there's nothing wrong with what you are. There's something wrong with the world that tells you that you're wrong. But that's the problem. You know, the problem is the world that thinks mutants are bad. Being a mutant is not bad at all. Those, I think, in some ways, are some of my favorite Magneto moments, because that's something that Professor X doesn't do. Professor X, you know, he loves mutants, but he doesn't quite do that like there is, you know, love your mutation and make it wonderful and different.
I sort of feel like he does, but like not the way Magneto does. I mean, like, his whole school is basically devoted to that premise.
Right.
You know, but he doesn't have... Certainly in the movies, I feel like they haven't given him that. Maybe in the first one or two a little bit. Like, they haven't really given him that kind of angle.
I guess it's that what Magneto does that Xavier doesn't do. Xavier doesn't say there's anything wrong with being a mutant, but he doesn't go that step further of saying, if you feel bad about being a mutant, it's because society is fundamentally wrong for thinking you're bad about being a mutant.
Right.
You know, and that's where, like, Magneto does have that because Professor X, he really is sympathetic to human fear about mutants.
Yeah.
In a way that I think Magneto isn't.
Right.
And like we said, that can be problematic, but that there's something really powerful when he's like, no, I'm not going to be sympathetic to the fact that people think you're wrong or bad.
Yeah.
And there I'm like, yeah, like, you know, because there I'm like, yeah, like the people who are like, well, I'm not ready to deal with transgender people yet. It's like, no, that's not that's not our problem, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it is our problem. I mean, it is the problem of, you know what I mean.
It is a society, but the point being that that's not on whatever the group is that's being oppressed.
Right.
It's so important to be like that. There's nothing. The fact that people have a problem with you is not in any way something wrong with you.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. And I have to say, one of my least favorite superhero, any superpowered anyone kind of tropes is the like, I just want a normal life. Like, like, come on. Like, I don't know. Like in Heroes, right?
Right.
Did you watch Heroes?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like Claire, she's fucking immortal. Although, spoiler alert, maybe she's not. But the last reboot of Heroes, like, I could have done without, really. But like, I don't know. I'd be kind of psyched, you know? And it's like, yeah, sure, like, I understand, like, not everybody's going to be happy with themselves, even if it's something that other people would be happy with. But, like, it's like, come on. Like,
I mean, I hear you there, but this is a topic you and I have discussed a lot. I mean, you are, shall we say, slightly more individualistic than the average person.
A little bit.
And I think you are slightly less, you are slightly less aware of social pressure to conform than many other people are.
A little bit less.
I would happily say that I am a lot more aware of those kind of pressures. And
Sure.
There are ways in which I am different than other people that I think are wonderful. And that there are ways in which I often wish that I wasn't different in those ways because I definitely feel that pressure. And I think when you look at how much, and I mean, this was to go back to that same example I used before, Malcolm X often he would talk about like all of the things that black people would sometimes do to try to make themselves appear more white.
Right.
He talks himself about
straightening.
hair straightening and things like that. And I think that there's kind of an equivalency there of, that's why Magneto's message of you being a mutant is so beautiful is important, because you're right. It can be a kind of played out story trope. I'm not arguing with you there, but I'm just saying I do, unless the writing is bad, I don't have a moment where I see that story trope and I think I don't believe this. I absolutely believe that there would be mutants who would, it's in one of the worst X-Men movies, but there is a powerful storyline, I think, of the Angel character. Yeah, literally wanting to cut off his wings because he doesn't want his father to judge him. I think,
I think they've had like 3 different Angels in that one timeline.
Yeah, I mean, that's problematic, but the point is still the same. I mean, I think there is, just think about, how many people try to deny a part of their identity or a part of themselves because they want to fit in with something.
Right, for sure. And it's not that I feel like it should never be a story that ever gets told. Mm-hmm. It's that
it's a trope.
I feel
that's for sure.
Yeah, it's the way there's a lot of things that we've discussed where there's things that you have like a particular pet peeve where I'm like, well, I don't really mind it as a story,
Yeah.
But there's too many of it,
I can see that.
And to me, it's just one of those ones that I actually, you know what? I feel like Magneto's a really good character if you're going to do that trope,
Yeah.
If you're going to use that trope, let's have a character like Magneto being like, whoa, hold on,
Right.
Like, Rogue, you're awesome. You're awesome for who you are. Like, sure, you can't touch boys without like killing them or whatever.
Can't touch any. I mean, a lack of human touch for your entire life, I think we could call a significant downside.
Yeah, but the thing is like that those 3 X-Men movies took Rogue from being this awesome, badass, self-possessed character to being like, this whiny teenager who's just like, I don't want my power. And it's like,
Yeah, no, I hear you there. And I think here again, this is where we get into the issues of the ideals that we think the movies are about and the flawed storytelling that makes the issues a lot, so I think that happens. Let me move us along a little bit though, because I want us to talk about the idea of goals and methods. And so let's just talk specifically about goals. And I think Magneto, we can't really talk about his goals in a vacuum. His goals are very clearly opposed to Xavier's, to Professor X's. So in terms of looking at the two of them, and the different visions they have for what should happen with mutants, where do you come down? Are you on Team X or Team Magneto? Looking at the goals for the moment.
Just at the goals, I'm on Team X. I mean, he believes in integration. He believes that people who are different can live together peacefully and happily, and there will be struggle, but that it's worthwhile in the end to try to have everybody be able to be happy together. And Magneto's he's like a segregationalist a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. He builds an asteroid for mutants to move to, and he has an island country of Genosha for mutants to move to, and he's doing that sometimes in response to humans being, or non-mutant humans, I guess, being horrible to mutants, and so it's one of those things where I think it can be understandable.
Right.
But in terms of I think Magneto's base goal is admirable. He wants to protect mutants, right? But then I think he ends up kind of going off the rails, not in terms of like, oh, well, he'll kill someone to protect a mutant. Okay, I think I'm fine with that, you know, if it's necessary, you know, if if you know, if somebody's trying to shoot Emma Frost and she's in her diamond mode, and then he like kills them with their own bullet or whatever, it's like, well, you know what, she was going to be fine.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like she can't be harmed there. But like, if somebody's in mortal peril and he's protecting them and he ends up killing some people, like I don't think that's the worst thing, or even bad at all. But I do think when he's like, okay, now let's kill all the non-mutant humans, it's like, whoa there.
Right.
You know,
well,
that if you think that's the solution, that sounds like the final solution. You know, that's like
I mean, quite literally. And
yeah, exactly.
It's interesting because I'll admit I thought you were going to come down to here. I'm a little surprised because I'm probably more on Team Magneto in some ways, and I thought we would be the other place. And I think
me too.
I think it's interesting because the way you describe it in terms of the integration segregation, like I think to me segregation is a word that only really works when it's talking about like the group in power. Making the division. To me, this is more about the kind of like the desire for separate, safe space.
Right.
And there, I have trouble being against that, especially because, and here let's do some real spoilers for the movie Logan. Right. Granted, Logan is only one particular version of the story, but you know, one of Magneto's constant critiques of Xavier is that he's too naive, that he puts too much hope in the humans, and like I have the same hope. But there's a part of me that sort of, I guess more and more is becoming more cynical and is starting to think like that some of that naivete is really problematic. And in the movie Logan, at least, I feel like one of the things that happens in Logan is that Magneto winds up being right. Now, Magneto never appears in the movie, and we never really learn exactly what happened. But one of the things that happens in that movie is they basically say, like, eventually, in part because Professor X, like, with his, aging and dementia, he was losing control of his mental powers. Some terrible accidents happened, and not entirely because of that, but that being one of the factors, like humanity really turned on the mutants and has been mostly hunting them down. So yeah, I kind of look at that. At least in that world, was Magneto right?
I mean, there's a few things. One, I think that world is ridiculous.
Yeah, that's legit.
I mean, I might not say I loved the movie, but I there were things I loved about it. I liked it a lot, and I think it was very good.
Yeah.
But like the idea that the humans could destroy all the mutants, like I just don't buy it.
That's
like, sorry, like I mean, unless the X-Men like helped them, right? You know what I mean? Like, just the mutants are so much more powerful than the humans, than the non-mutant humans. Like, it's just, come on. Really? Like, and it's not like they had Sentinels running around all over the place, you know? Mm-hmm. So it's not like they used the robots to destroy the. So I just
putting aside the reality.
Put that aside, the like the plausibility or whatever. You know, in that world, I mean, we don't know what happened or how it went down, but yeah, I mean, Magneto is objectively right that there are some humans who want to destroy all mutants, right? The same way that if you said there are some people who wanted to destroy X, Y, or Z race in the real world or religion or whatever, like, you'd be right. There are some people who want to do any one of those things.
Right.
You know? There are people who want to kill all of the gay people in the world. There are people who want to kill all of the black people, all of the white people, all the men or women. Like, there are people. The question is, like, are there people in power? Are there enough people? Like, is it a thing that they could plausibly accomplish or make actual significant headway?
Well, and if I remember in the movie Logan, and certainly this is true in some of the other stories, like, I think we have to be careful that the thing Magneto isn't afraid of isn't just the, like, physical, literal killing of mutants.
Right.
It's the obliteration of mutant culture, you know, and so for example, and here the equivalency of, like, you know, the people who are not interested in, like, you know, killing all gay people, they just want gay people to not be as seen, you know, to, like, go back into the closet,
right.
you know, and, like, but my understanding in the movie Logan, it's more that people who have mutations are now being registered and tracked and basically like getting the kind of chemical or whatever it is that will reduce their mutations, and that more importantly, no new mutants are being born because of things, and that's what makes the creation of these like basically artificially created mutants so much more significant. Is that so? Yeah, I think in that world, we're not talking about the literal killing of mutants, but we're talking about the like eradication of mutation.
Oh, I could see that. I mean, definitely the no new mutants being born for however long, which, like, I guess they put something in the water, or like, how did they?
Yeah, again, let's not get too into the how.
Right, but I did get the impression that they basically hunted down and killed most or all of the mutants, but maybe not. Maybe that's not. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that the movie was perhaps intentionally vague on that, or perhaps just that it wasn't.
But again,
it wasn't focused on the how. It was like, here's where we are in the world now.
Right. My question is, I guess my question was, in a world where that had happened, does that make Magneto more right? And it sounds like what you're kind of saying is, well, you have trouble believing that would happen, and so you have trouble thinking of Magneto in those terms. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, basically what I'm saying is that I think, there's a couple things. One, a single outcome, this is like the poker player in me, right? But like, I don't think a particular outcome justifies necessarily a certain fear of that outcome.
Yeah, no, that's legit.
I mean, I think, let's say that there was a 1 in a million chance that something happens, and then that's what happened. Like, if you changed everything in your life to try to prevent that one thing to happen, well, and then it actually ended up happening. That's just kind of funny. But it.
Right.
I don't think that necessarily justifies changing everything in your life to prevent. And then if that's the actual outcome, it's like, was that the only possible outcome? Like, unless you had all of the information, and there's no such thing as randomness or chance, which you don't have all the information, unless maybe you have a mutation that gives you that. I don't know. But if you do, then if there's no way to alter the outcome, then none of it matters anyway. So now we're going down that rabbit hole. But the main point is, like, if Magneto did whatever he did, and then the outcome was what he feared, that doesn't mean he was necessarily right to fear that outcome.
No,
like,
I
in
can
terms of
that.
it. But the thing beyond that is that, like, sometimes that outcome, and they do this in some of the animated shows, sometimes that outcome comes about because of Magneto.
Right. No, and I think that in some ways is one of the most, both insightful and I think in some ways can be problematic storylines sometimes is this question of, like, the way that the fear on both sides feeds into each other. Because, people are afraid of mutants, and so Magneto is afraid of people, what they're going to do with that fear, and then now the things Magneto does, well, now people are a lot more afraid of mutants.
Right, exactly. And, like, on September 10th, 2001, there was Islamophobia in the United States.
Yeah.
There was xenophobia in the United States. On September 12th, 2001, there was more.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, whatever was there was exasperated and open, that's actually a really interesting question that leads me to that I hadn't thought of before. But I mean, in the situation you're talking about, like Osama bin Laden and the people who were behind 9/11, that was absolutely their intent. Like, they wanted people to be more scared of Muslims because then we would do, and they wanted what we have now.
Right. I'm having trouble remembering. Is there an extent? I'm trying to remember if there are storylines in which Magneto is explicit in saying he wants to stoke human fear against mutants because he's basically trying to, like, incite in the same kind of way.
A race war, basically.
Well, right. I mean, because I feel like that I could see that being one of his goals, in part because he wants all mutants to. It's like kind of like.
Yeah. Like, he thinks that the only way to win is to win outright, is to exterminate non-mutant humans,
Well,
and so,
well,
or at least to have a war where mutants win.
well, or even if I said it kind of from his perspective, the way he might frame it is when the non-mutants say that they are fine with mutants, on some level they're lying.
Right.
Because and then at some level, like, deep down, if pushed hard enough, all non-mutant humans will reveal that they hate mutants, and I need mutants to see that, and so I'm going to push them hard enough to
Right.
get them to show that, so that all mutants will realize they should join me and not Xavier, because this is a fight.
Right.
Like, I can see that story happening very easily. I'm having trouble remembering if that ever was something they kind of explored.
I'm pretty sure they did that in some of the animated shows. The animated shows weren't mostly that sophisticated, but they were kind of a little bit sometimes. And I think they sort of implied that. I can't remember Magneto ever actually like declaring that out in a villain monologue or anything.
Right.
But I could certainly see that being a very compelling story, for him. And he, I could get that, and I would like to see that. I mean, I want to see a Magneto solo film.
That'd be amazing.
Right? I think they were talking about it, but it just never,
We talked before about how, I see him a lot, very similar to Kingpin from Daredevil. And in a lot of ways, I think season 1 of Netflix's Daredevil is as much it's a TV show about a hero, Daredevil, but it is just as much a TV show about a villain/anti-hero, a villain really, but it is just as much Kingpin's show as it is Daredevil's. And in some ways First Class is somewhat like that, but yeah, I would love to see something that really goes. I just want Netflix to do X-Men. I think
they should do an X-Men show. I know.
A Netflix version of Eric and Char. I think that'd be amazing.
Yeah, I think that could be great.
Because you do still need. I mean, there's an extent to which I think Xavier and Eric, Professor X and Magneto, they're so much foils for each other that I would still want both. Like, I think a Magneto story that didn't have Professor X in it would kind of be missing something a lot. I
think it would be different. I mean, I mostly agree with you, but like I could do with a solo film of like, Magneto just hunting Nazis in Argentina.
Yeah.
Just show me 2 hours of that. I'm good with that.
I would want Xavier to be at least a part of that. Just an occasional like, come on, just because the way they play against. Maybe it's just because Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart are so good together. I do. There's an extent to which, as much as I don't love a lot of that first set of X-Men movies, I do think that the dynamic between the two of them was just extraordinary, and I think very well captured the dynamic between those two characters.
Yeah, I agree. I like Fassbender's I like Fassbender's portrayal of Magneto better.
I can see that.
But I love Ian McKellen, and I think he, particularly in how he related to, Xavier, I think that was great.
Yeah. And you may be right. I do, as you say that, I think you're right. I like Fassbender's a little better. I just think in part, I don't think McAvoy is bad, but the dynamic between him and McAvoy is just nowhere near as good.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I felt like in the first movie it was, but then it kind of, in the second and third movies of the later trilogy of Days of Future Past and Apocalypse, they just kind of, I don't know. I feel like they just wrote Magneto to the plot instead of the plot to Magneto.
Right. That makes sense. Well, and so, yeah, I think that certainly in X-Men, there's a point, I remember, I'm watching Days of Future Past, and we're like, there's a point at which Magneto is just sort of like, nope, I'm going to decide to be the villain now. For in ways that just don't make any sense.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And similarly, I felt, when you were kind of talking about the trope, I felt that a little bit in X-Men Apocalypse, because I don't remember the exact details, but there's an extent to which, like, I get so much a part of Magneto's story is that he's carrying all this anger and rage and fear, and that drives him.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an extent to which I sort of feel like sometimes that with a character like that, there's a need to kind of, like, repoke that, just to, like, and say, okay, well, something bad happened, to remind him of all of that, and so now he can be just as pissed off and angry all over again.
Yeah.
And that's I only saw Apocalypse once, but that's my memory of what happens there, is that there's something, like, he has a wife and child, and, like, they wind up getting killed because of anti-mutant things, and so all of a sudden he's, anything that he does is going to be justified. And I think that that's a real mistake, because I think one of the things I love about the character is he's not a mustache twirler by any means. He's not, like, you could have a character who says, for legitimate reasons, I hate non-mutants, and so I'm therefore going to go to any and all extremes to destroy non-mutants. Mm-hmm. That's kind of a boring character, but that's an understandable character. That's not Magneto. Magneto still has a code and beliefs and ideas and very legitimate. I mean, he's brilliant,
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think in that story he has a wife who's not a mutant.
Yeah.
And then his daughter's a mutant, and they both die, and it was like. I had a huge problem with that scene. I had a friend make a post about how much he liked it, and I was like, what? And I felt like you could have taken the same thing and had it be a flashback, and, like, it might have kind of worked.
Uh-huh.
But, like, the way they played it out, it just felt so predictable, partially because, like, we already knew Magneto was going to be one of the Four Horsemen,
Right.
Like, that was in the previews. So, if we already know that, then, it's like there's no suspense. That's okay. This is me not going on a rant about previews and how they ruin movies.
I can give the same rant, but yes, we'll hold off on that. Let's talk for a minute though about his methods, because I think I think we're mostly in agreement, although there are some places where I think I'm a little more sympathetic to some of his goals. Maybe not even his goals, but just to his cynicism.
Right.
And I think that is honestly that's changed. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have been 100% Professor X. And but where, in terms of his methods, where do you see his methods as being either good? Like, I think, okay, when he wants to blow up all of the city or all the people, but we're against those methods. But,
right, or do something that kills all of the non-mutants. Like,
right.
No thanks.
where have some of his methods made sense to you?
That's a good question. I mean, like, pretty much throughout First Class, I was like, yeah, okay, that's all fine. But then I think at the end of First Class, I'm trying to remember what he did at the end of First Class. Like, I think he got everybody to fire at them or something?
Yeah, like, I think I'm trying to remember, but I think at the end of First Class, he kind of wanted to let the nuclear war happen.
Yeah. So that, like, I was with him right up until that. Like, when he, like, killed the old Nazi guy who was the part of the Hellfire Club or whatever. Right. Like, I was like, yeah, that's fine. I'm okay with that. He killed your mom, like, he was a Nazi. Like, go ahead, have at it. I know Xavier's like, no, don't do it, Eric. It's like, you know what? Go ahead, kill him. I'm fine. That's fine. That's fine. Take his helmet. But, like, don't start a nuclear war. Like, just don't do it.
Yeah.
Like, and, like, Days of Future Past, like, I don't really remember. I think they were trying to stop something from happening. Yeah, like, I think what was it? They were there trying to stop Mystique.
Right, they're trying to stop
from killing Trask or something.
Yeah, they're trying to stop Mystique from killing Trask, which is the thing that, I mean, it's actually kind of, here's the opposite of what we're just saying. It's here, they're basically trying to stop the 9/11 type event, which is going to get all the humans to hate mutants so much that the Sentinels happen. But
then Magneto goes and does it anyway, and then Mystique stops it, and that's where I felt like Magneto was just going into another movie. I was like, I can understand a setting where he's like, especially the way you kind of explained it, where he kind of wants to, like, poke the bear so that the people who could be on his side see that the bear's a bear kind of thing,
Right.
you know? Like, I thought that was a very interesting explanation. I like that idea. I don't feel like they did that,
Mm-hmm.
you know? I feel like that part of the movie was just like, why is he doing this now? And that didn't, and I mean, I really don't like that. Basically I don't know, most methods that are like, yeah, and now we're going to start a war. Like, I'm generally like, whoa, hold on. Like, are you sure there's no other better options? And maybe sometimes there aren't, you know, like,
right.
just give Hitler Poland. It's fine. Like that, you know, like sometimes it is time to be like, wait. No. Okay. It's time. It is. Sometimes it is time for war, basically, when somebody else is, when it's literally unavoidable, and when the only alternative to war is to allow whoever would make war with you just be oppressive,
right,
and murder people. Then it's like, okay, well, that's not peace, right? That's oppression. And you know, similarly, like if you look at the news now, I don't know. Here's a rare instance of like the whole like North Korea thing. Like, I don't think it's insane to be like, yeah, we really should consider military options, because like there is a crazy person who wants to use nuclear weapons, you know, or maybe he just wants to bristle. I don't know. But like, meanwhile, he's oppressing 25 million people. Like, that's the part to me that like people like just kind of gloss over, you know?
No, I mean, I'll admit the North Korea situation, I don't really feel like I know enough about even to comment on, but I remember having similar feelings after 9/11 about Afghanistan, where, you know, all of a sudden there were all these people saying, we've got to bomb we got to bomb the Taliban, because of all the things they're doing. And I was concerned about the whole rush to war. But I remember also, I'd been saying for a year we should be doing something militarily about the Taliban because of the horrible things they were doing to their own citizens.
Well, yeah, that's the thing.
Well, and I think to get us back to our topic a little bit, I think one of the things that I think Magneto raises as a really hard question is, you know, at what point is, as a general rule, I mean, I generally am a big believer in, you know, you only use force in self-defense. And so basically what that means is you let the other person throw the first punch.
Right.
But I think there's a sort of doctrine that I generally find kind of terrifying, but I admit there is at least a little bit of potential logic to, of the kind of, you know, in a world where the first punch will be lethal.
Right.
Is the act of self-defense to throw a preemptive first punch? Okay, but what does that mean? You know, and how do you know?
Yeah.
And I think Magneto would argue that everything he does is self-defense, because what he's saying is they will get to throw but that the time when the humans decide to throw the first punch of let's round up all the mutants, that by then it's too late.
Right.
And you know, here it's the like, I think most of the time he's acting more out of fear, and so I have trouble saying I can support what he's doing.
Yeah.
But I also can see where he's coming from, because also saying like we're just going to wait till the humans truly do something terrible against mutants. Is it going to be too late then? You know, like you're saying with North Korea, like, you know, do we actually just wait until they launch the first missile?
Till they blow up Seoul, or like? Yeah,
I mean, the people of Seoul probably don't like that strategy very much.
Right, but then again, if anybody attacks them now, they might just blow up Seoul before, you know. So it's like, it is a catch-20 bad. But.
Yeah, very accurate. Very accurate. So yeah, I think there's a lot more we could say on any of this, but those were the kind of the main things I wanted to go over in terms of Magneto. For you, is there any other sort of questions or parts of his character you really wanted to dive more into?
No, but there was one more thing that you'd brought up when we were talking about this ahead of time. Just sort of his arrogance and his just general certitude that he's right.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's very Batman, you know, and in just in terms of like, you know, there's certain characters that are like have a level of self-doubt. I think villains often tend to lack that, but sometimes they have it, you know. But he definitely doesn't seem to have any doubt of, you know, whether or not the humans will eventually come for the mutants, basically. Right. Like, he seems to see that as an inevitability. And I mean, it's not directly a real world scenario, and I don't know whether there's a way to agree or disagree with him within the setting of the the Marvel universe, within that world of the X-Men. But it's certainly I mean, in the real world it's different, because we're talking about people who have differences that are real in terms of culture, and real in terms of physical appearance or lifestyle, but that aren't genetic in the way that humans and mutants have genetic differences in the X-Men.
Well, but I would say that there is a real, because you're taking what I was saying before a lot further than I had even thought about it. But I think you're right, and I would go back to it, because I think no matter what the differences we're being talked about are, I think there is real value in a person, whatever their belief system is, particularly if they're saying that their belief system justifies them doing potentially really dangerous, violent things.
Mm-hmm.
I think a person like that has to be able to have someone challenge their belief system, and be willing to listen to that. And I tend to be the most scared of people who don't do that. And I think and that's I mean, it's a different argument, but to me that's my biggest problem with Captain America and Civil War, is that it just feels like he has this idea of like, I'm right, I know what's right, I'm not listening to anyone else. And I know we disagree there, but
yeah.
But the comparison to but here is like, I think you're right, is like, to me, I am okay with a lot of Magneto's fear and a lot of his cynicism. But you're right, I think the thing that kind of pushes it over the edge is he is so convinced of those things, he's never willing to say, hey, I think I have real reason to be fearful here, but I want some outside perspective to check me. Like, am I right here, or am I maybe overreacting? Like, he doesn't do that, and I think that's a real problem.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Professor X kind of doesn't really do that either. They both are leaders of their own sides, and I'm going to get back to that Astra thing that we talked about a long time ago, where you were like, so would you want Neil deGrasse Tyson to like run the government, basically?
Right.
And we kept kind of coming around to that, and I was like, well, no, I wouldn't want a person. I don't think there should be a president of the United States with all the powers that the president of the United States currently has, let alone all the powers that the current president seems to think he has. But that's how, the president has gotten so much power, is that the president wasn't supposed to have so much power originally, Like, when the Constitution was written, that wasn't the idea. Although there were some people who were like, oh, let's just make Washington a king. It's like, well, nice that didn't happen. Right. But, like, I don't think one person should have that much power. And I think if somebody like Magneto or Xavier does have that much power, because, I mean, they have power, right? Beyond just influence over other people, they have this raw power. But then they also have influence over large groups of people who also have lots of raw power themselves.
Right. And in theory, they're supposed to be like that. They are each other's check. They are, in theory, the one who is. But I think, at least in the movies that I've seen, I can't ever remember, like, they're having conversations to win. That, like, their verbal chat, like, the metaphor is very intentional. They're playing verbal chess at the same time they're playing actual chess.
Yes.
And there's never a moment of, Xavier saying, oh, Magneto, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm being a little too naive, or vice versa. And I think Magneto needs that, but you're right, Xavier needs that as well. Because he is, in his own way, just as assured of himself, and that's just as scary.
Right, and to me, there's a difference between being assured of yourself because, you think such and such, you think A, B, and C because X, Y, and Z are true, right? And thus you've reasoned it out, and you're completely certain in your conclusions because you have assumptions that you believe are right. And there are people who, and then when somebody says, well, Z isn't right, you're wrong in that assumption because, QRLST, I don't know. Here's some things that disprove this assumption. Now reconsider your conclusions. And if somebody's willing to reconsider their assumptions when presented with new evidence, that to me that's true rationality, right? That's what a rational person should do. And then you re-examine you have to like recalculate your conclusions once your assumptions have been changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So once you've had some assumptions disproven. But then there are people who are just like, well, A, B, and C because, I'm right because I'm right.
Right.
And that's useless. It's like maybe you're lucky and you're right, but like there's no basis for that, right? You're not.
I mean, we were talking before about, how I was sort of pretty anti the Taliban even before 9/11. But then when Bush wanted to, I got real nervous again. And I'll admit, a big part of that was because, Bush was very plain in saying, like, I absolutely have no doubt about the fact that I'm right, and I would never question that. And, like, that's terrifying.
Yeah, and, I mean, we do disagree on the whole Captain America thing. But I agree with you in this, in the basic idea that, like, yeah, you need to be willing to re-examine, and that's what I think Captain America, like, he should have taken some time to re-examine. The other problem, though, is that there was no time. It was like, oh, well, do you want to sign this on Tuesday? It's like, wait, it's a like 700-page document that's going to, like, determine what we can or cannot do with our lives. Like, maybe give us a week or a month.
I mean, that's definitely another time where the writers,
yes.
altered the plot beyond believability in order to create the tension that they wanted instead of telling a more accurate story, which is
of course
frustrating.
Right. But we got to see a cool fight at the airport, so gotta make up for it.
It was a great fight scene.
It was pretty awesome. I mean, Ant-Man for the win.
Yep.
But yeah. So it's when people are unwilling to re-examine their conclusions because when they're presented with new evidence, like you get to the point where it's like, why are we even having a conversation anymore?
Right.
Why are we even discussing our opinions or our conclusions? But I do think if they'd had, if Captain America has the time to re-examine, okay, why are you trying to, like, really try to convince me of this?
Right.
Like, they have a 2-minute conversation because it's a 2-hour movie, and you're not going to put a 2-hour conversation in a 2-hour movie that's an action film, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, like, how long would that conversation really last? A long time. It would be a long argument, or it should be. And, at the end of it, maybe nobody changes their mind because none of their assumptions have been changed. They're operating from different assumptions, and maybe they're saying, maybe Xavier says to Magneto, yeah, if I thought that was unavoidable, then I would be on your side doing what you're doing.
Right.
Maybe we discuss the methods a little bit, but, like, yeah, maybe we would say, okay, mutants need their own place to live. Mutants need to be at war with humans because humans are ultimately going to be at war with mutants, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true.
Xavier's saying, no, I reject that assumption, right? My assumption is that humans and mutants can live in peace and harmony, and so I'm going to work towards achieving that end. Now, do either of them have any real basis for their assumptions? I mean, I would say not really. I would say, we don't know. We don't know whether or not people, with superpowers could peacefully live with people without superpowers. I would say, though, that if we look at their histories, both of their points of view make a lot of sense as a character. I mean, Xavier grew up in New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, New York I've always thought that people could live with each other and get along with each other. People who are different in basically all the ways that people can be different. Except, like, I guess everybody's living in a city, but right. There are a lot of people who are from urban areas who live in the city.
You're going to get a much different view of things than growing up in the Holocaust. I mean, I think
exactly.
And you're right,
that's a pretty good counter example. Like, maybe people can't live together that well.
And I think neither one of their experiences is more right or more true than the other, but it also makes sense that they would see things differently.
Right, exactly, and I guess the takeaway there is, like, you don't know, right? Like you can't. I don't think you can know. I mean, maybe you can know. I don't like to say you can't know, but I don't know, and I haven't seen a compelling, rational argument for why it is or isn't possible. I mean, I guess like you could study animals and you could look at like cats and humans living together peacefully, dogs and humans living together peacefully. You know, like if different species can get along, like it seems like people from the same species should be able to get along. You know, there are and have been cities that are cosmopolitan and have people from all over the world with different beliefs, and like you know, there are higher crime rates in cities, but like maybe a lot of that's because people are in proximity to each other, you know.
Right.
And I'm sure there have been a lot of studies on these things, and I doubt anybody's come up with a like, oh yeah, this is definitively the answer, the way 2 + 2 = 4. But you know, I'm sure there's evidence, and it's worth considering that evidence. And that's the sort of thing that like Magneto and Xavier should be doing. But like, I don't know, you know.
So clearly, that's our problem with Magneto. He's just not evidence-based enough in his conclusions.
I mean, that's my problem.
Yeah, that's about true. I think we're about ready to wrap up then. Any other last things? I think that was a good last topic to dive into. Thank you all for listening. Paul, what's up? What else have you been up to these days? Just while we have you for one last minute, you been doing any writing?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of writing, and I'm about to do a lot more. And you could go to my website, zenmadman.com, and then I'll tell you what I'm doing, because I'm not sure. But it's a lot. There's a lot of stuff.
Okay. So
was that incoherent enough?
Yeah, if you want to go find writing without any knowledge of the topic or possible ideas in it, go ahead and read writing at Zenman. It has actually, I've read a lot of Paul's stuff. It's great to follow. Zenmadman.com. Of course, for other podcasts like that, for other blog posts about similar topics, check out superheroethics.com. That's our website. You can also follow this podcast by subscribing at Superhero Ethics on either iTunes or Stitcher. Most importantly, though, join us in this conversation. We would love to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook or on Twitter at that same name, Superhero Ethics. What do you think of Magneto? Is he a hero? Is he a villain? Is he an anti-hero or an anti-villain, as Paul was talking about? What are some of the moments where you think Magneto really, you were kind of on Team Magneto or Team Xavier, or a different perspective in the whole X-Men thing? Let us know what you think. We would love to hear your thoughts. We always respond and love to get into good conversations. The other thing I would ask folks to do, if you can, is if you like this podcast, leave us a review. I think you can do this on Stitcher. I know definitely on iTunes. If you leave us a review, especially if you give us 5 stars, 4 stars, that's the way more people get to listen to this. It goes higher up in people's search functions. More people find this podcast. More people get to join the conversation. And you get to hear more from us. And hopefully more frequently. And because I know Paul and I would love to do a lot more. We just want to sort of get the word out a little bit more about what we're doing. So please tune in. We've got some exciting new podcasts coming down the stretch for you in the next couple of weeks. Thanks for listening, and have a great day. Nothing insightful or witty to say in closing?
Oh, was I supposed to say something about how Magneto is the most metal villain of them all?
Oh, dear.